Hey everybody, welcome back to the Brie Myself and God channel where I'm bringing you all things Brie and all things God. Today we are kicking it quarantine style. I'm coming to you from my lovely childhood bedroom back home with my family. Today I just want to share a recap on my channel of a message that I actually shared on IG Live last weekend that I got a lot of good feedback from. People told me they were blessed, they were encouraged. So I just wanted to record a recap and have it here so that anybody who missed it can get that word if you need it today. So let's get to it. With last weekend being Easter weekend, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the story of Jesus's death and resurrection. And I was just surprised by the ways that what was going on then speaks a lot into what's going on now. So this video is called 5 Lessons from the Cross to the Coronavirus. But it applies to a lot of the craziness that's going on in our life. So if you have anything that you're seeing that makes you say, why God? Where is God? How could God be powerful and good and let this happen? All those types of questions are what we are addressing today in this video. So let's get to it. The first thing that really came out in my reflections on the cross and the story of Jesus going to the cross was the way that it must have been so confusing for his followers and everybody that saw him the 3 years leading up to that to see him go to the cross. Because he was walking around for 3 years before this happened, raising the dead, healing people with leprosy, opening the eyes of the blind. He was demonstrating so much power. And then on this weekend, randomly, literally a week after he came into Jerusalem and everybody was praising him, he gets arrested and beaten and crucified, and he's sitting there dying. Just think about if you met somebody who you really thought was God in the flesh and you were watching them die. That's not the power you expect. That's not the savior you expect. That's definitely not what a lot of people, Jewish people, had in mind when they met Jesus and thought he was the Messiah. So their expectations were really, really blown and just caused them to say, like, are you really God? Like, how could you be God and this is happening? And then the people that didn't know Jesus, the people that didn't believe him, were making fun of him and mocking him and saying, if you're God, how about you pull yourself down off that cross? They would beat him and say, if you're God, how about you tell me who just socked you in the mouth? What's his name? Prophesy it. And they basically said to themselves, if you can't do that, then you're not God. You're not who you say you are. And that is the thing that stuck out to me about the story back then and today, is that people were looking for specific circumstances for God to do specific things to prove that he was God. And they pretty much reasoned that if you don't do this, you're not God. And when I was reading that story, I was like, wow, that's really arrogant of you to, as a human with such limited perspective, say, if you don't do X, Y, Z, you're not who you said you were. But the truth of the matter is, he was. Jesus could have come down off the cross. He could have told them exactly who hit him in the mouth or whatever they did. But that wasn't a part of the plan. There was a bigger picture in mind. He was on that cross, laying down his life to save all of humanity and give himself as a perfect sacrifice so that we could be accepted by God. If he would have got down off that cross, then that would have messed up the whole plan, and we wouldn't have been able to be redeemed in the way that we were. But they didn't have all that information. And so they were trying to judge God off of only human information. And that is the thing that I feel like is a lesson from that, is like, God wouldn't be God if his identity were based off of man-made tests and demands. He doesn't always show up exactly how we think he should. We can't even always see what he's doing. But it doesn't mean he's not God. It doesn't mean he's not good. And it doesn't mean he's not working on a bigger picture. And we deal with that same issue today. We say, how could a loving God let this virus ravage the earth? If he's loving and powerful, he would not allow this to happen. But it's like we only have a human perspective. And really, we could say that about everything going on in the world. This whole world is broken and full of so much pain. And we could ask ourselves, how could God even let the world exist right now? But there's a bigger picture as to why the world currently exists, and there's a bigger picture as to where we're headed. And the Bible tells us that we don't know that bigger picture from our current standpoint. Ecclesiastes says, God made everything beautiful in its own time. He planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the full scope of God's work from beginning to end. So it's just important for us to remember that where we are, there's a bigger picture that we may not see right now. But that leads me to my next point, which is that God has revealed some things to us to help us see things more clearly. Before Jesus went to the cross, he actually told his followers that he was going to be crucified. Like, he told them, like, point blank, the Son of Man is going to have to be traded into the hands of the high priest, suffer many things, be killed, but on the third day he will rise again. And when I was looking at the way that his disciples responded when he actually was arrested and crucified, they deserted him, they denied him, they were afraid, they were mourning. You would think that Jesus never told them anything. You would think Jesus never gave them a heads up that this is exactly what's going to happen. And I feel like that actually kind of sounds like us too. There's so much happening in this world that we don't understand. But the truth is, God told us some things to help us get through this. And if we remember what he said, it would affect how we respond to the things happening around us. So there's 3 things I feel like God's told us in his word that we should take into account when we are processing all of this stuff that's happening with the virus, with suffering, with pain. First thing that he told us is that we would have suffering in this world. Jesus literally said, I've said things to you so that you may have peace. In the world, you will have a lot of tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. That's what he said to his disciples before he died. 2 Timothy says, understand this, in the last days, there will be times of great difficulty. And it names all these things that would happen. Wars, diseases, all these different things. Another verse says, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but God delivers them out of them all. So it's like God has told us that we would have suffering in this world. And he told us, don't even think that it's strange when it happens, because I'm telling you now, it's coming. But what he also told us, the second thing, is that there will be redemption in the end. One of my favorite verses about like how God's going to redeem the world says, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. There will be no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain. For the old things have passed away. So God has promised us that at his appointed time, Jesus is going to come back and save and redeem the world to the way that he intended for it to be. And I guess what we might be asking ourselves is, why don't you just go ahead and do that right now? Because this ain't it. This death, this pain, this life, this is not it. But honestly, he even gave us a reason for that in the word too. The Bible says the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some people consider slackness, but he's being patient towards us, not wanting anybody to perish, but wanting everybody to come to repentance. So one reason that the Bible gives us that this world continues to exist in its broken form is that God is trying to give people a chance to come to know him. Because once this world ends, we're all going to have to stand before God, and we're going to have to account for whether we have any relationship with him to be able to spend eternity with him. And he doesn't want anybody to be cut short in their opportunity to come to him in that time. But I know some people are not asking the big question of why the world exists in its current form. You just want to know, why is this thing happening in your specific life? And to that, God has promised that he would work all things together for the good of his people in the end. So with all the things that we go through, even the worst things, he's promised that he would work it out for our good. And I know that that's easier to hear than it is to take to heart, but it is a promise. And I think if we listen to those things, that it could help us get through. It doesn't mean we won't suffer, but it can help us. Number 4, even though God foretold all of these things, like he told us we would have pain and suffering in the world, it doesn't mean that he doesn't feel the pain of the situation, because he didn't design the world this way. Like, pain and suffering are not his design, and he feels that pain with us. Something that stuck out to me in the story of Jesus on the cross was how he cried out from the cross like, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I was looking at that and I was like, well, Jesus, didn't you know? Like, didn't you already know why God turned his face to you on the cross? Why he let you die? Why he let you carry the sin of the world on your shoulders? Why he let you take that punishment? Like, you know why. But I read something. I started looking up, why would Jesus say why in this situation? And one thing that I read was just that Jesus was just crying out in the agony of what it was. Even as someone who knows the end from the beginning, Jesus cried out, why, in the midst of his suffering. He suffered a gruesome separation from God that was never a part of God's original plan, and he felt the pain of that. And even though he knew God's plan for redemption, he felt that pain in his spirit. So if that's how Jesus was on the cross, then how much more does he have compassion on us when we're crying out in agony and confusion, when we don't even know everything that's going on? We don't even have the full picture. He hears us and he feels that pain with us. And one story that reminds me of that is how Jesus was when he was still on the earth and he was going to go raise someone from the dead. If you know the shortest verse in the Bible that says Jesus wept, it comes from this story. So it says, Jesus saw her weeping. It was like Mary or Martha. And the Jews who had come with her also weeping. And he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he asked them where he had laid them, where they had laid him. And they said, come and see. And when Jesus saw the body of the man, he says he wept. Now, Lazarus was somebody that Jesus was getting ready to raise from the dead. And he knew that breakthrough was coming. And he still wept because he saw the people that he loved crying and mourning this death. Death and pain were not meant to be in our life, and God knows that better than anyone else because he's familiar with his perfect design that he made before we messed it up, before we sinned, before we chose to bring evil into the world. And so he feels that pain, and he didn't create us in his perfect plan to live like this. So just know that he is with us and feels that compassion on us. And the other thing is, number 4, is that even though God told us this ahead of time and he feels our pain in it, he's also good to us within it and somehow brings his goodness out in the midst of everything that's going on. Prime example that when I was reading the story of Jesus, I saw how Mary and John were at the foot of the cross and God talked to them while Jesus was hanging on the cross. He looked down at them and he said, Mary, behold your son. John, behold your mother. And he basically committed them to each other and told John to take care of his mother while he was gone. And it's like Jesus didn't explain to them everything that was happening in that moment. And he didn't stop everything that was happening in that moment. But he took that time to say, I see you. I'm looking out for you. I'm taking care of what you're going to need in the midst of this. And I love you. And I don't know about y'all, but I have experienced that. There have been times in my life where I'm like, how could God be letting this happen? What is going on? This is so painful. And even in the midst of that, there's been little things that God has said or done where he's just let me know that he's with me and he's being good to me in the midst of it. Testimonies of God's goodness in the midst of the brokenness of this world are so many, too many to count. His healing, his provision, even in the midst of this virus, the way that people are stepping up and looking out for each other, that's the goodness of God working through people. Some people have experienced supernatural healing from this virus, all these different things. Unexplained goodness in this world is the work of God. But I also know that it can be hurtful when God doesn't show up in the way that we wanted him to, or it doesn't turn out the way we wanted him to. We might hear a testimony of someone get healed from the virus, but we also know someone that was lost to it. And that all is confusing and hard to manage and to deal with. And so I want to say that's valid. And that brings me to my last point. Number 5 is that we can bring our questions and our fears and our pain to God. It reminds me of the 2 thieves that were on the cross next to Jesus when he was dying. One of them mocked him and said, try to save yourself and save us while you're at it. And basically was like, you can't save yourself. You can't save us. You're not God. The other thief on his other side said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He basically acknowledged, I don't know why you're dying like I'm dying too. Like we're both dying here, but I believe that you're still God and I believe you have a kingdom. And I ask that in all of your power and in all of your goodness that you would remember me in the midst of this. And I just think that's such a powerful prayer that he didn't even ask God to take him down from the cross. I mean, not to say that he couldn't have and that would have been a bad thing to ask, but he just said, remember me. And sometimes I just think, man, that can be our prayer in the midst of this is like, God, I don't know what's going on, but I just want to know that you remember me. I want to know that you care about me. I want to know that you're looking out for me. I want to know that just don't forsake me in the midst of this. And I think that's a really powerful prayer that I believe that God answers, that in the midst of this, he never leaves us or forsakes us. And that thief made a good point to the other thief. He said, don't you fear God even in death? He basically was saying, you're literally about to die and you're mocking this man. You're mocking the Son of God when you could be crying out to him. And I think that's a really important point to remember. You know, sometimes we let the things that we go through cause us to reject God or judge God. But the frailty of our life should actually show us that at any given day, we might be gone from this world and have to face God. And the question that I want us to ask ourselves is, did we allow the ugly things that we saw on this earth to convince us that God wasn't good and to obscure his character from us, to cause us to reject him, so that when we stand before him and realize that he was good all this time, will we have already rejected him for all of eternity? Or will we have come to him humbly, asking him to remember us and being a living testimony that he did? And not only that he did remember us and bless us in this life, but that he can bless us and remember us and hold on to us and prosper us in the life to come. When you pray to God to remember you, when you pray to God to meet you, I am a living witness that he will, that he'll come into your space, that he'll come into your heart, that he'll heal you, that he'll strengthen you, and you will become not just a survivor of your circumstance, but you'll become more than a conqueror. You'll become someone who overcomes the grief and the pain and the brokenness of this world, and even become somebody that brings freedom in the lives of others. And so I just pray that we would let God in during this time, that we would trust that he is real. And I guess I'll just do a quick recap, is that from our human perspective, we're not in a place to judge God. We don't know the bigger picture that he's working on, but he is working. 2, he's told us some things to try to help us get through this time, and we want to remember what he's told us to help us get through. 3, even though he told us that this was going to happen, it still breaks his heart because it's not his perfect design, and he feels that compassion for us. 4, he's still good to us in the middle of it. He's still here with us in the middle of it, and he's still showing his goodness through it all. And 5, we can bring our questions, our confusion, and our pain to him, and he will redeem us, and he will bless us, and he will keep us, and he will, in the end, show us just how powerful and victorious and good he is, not only in this life, but in the life to come. That's what I got for you guys. I pray that it blessed you. I pray that you're keeping your head up and keeping your faith strong in the midst of this virus and everything else that's going on in the world. We're going to get through it with God on our side. The suffering that we're experiencing now pales in comparison to the goodness that God has for us on the other side of this situation and on the other side of this life. So I pray that you get to know him so that you can enjoy that. Love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Brie Myself and God channel, where I'm bringing you all things Brie and all things God. Bye.